Few years, it seems like January is a big news month. Hi, Brian Lilly here again with Sam Cooper from the Bureau.News. Sam, a couple years ago, it was the Iranians blowing the Ukrainian plane out of the sky with more than 100 Canadians on it. Then COVID. Last year, just got to turn off the email going bang. Last year, Justin Trudeau resigning at the start of the year. This year, it's Donald Trump in Venezuela. Early January is a big time for news. You and I have both been writing about this. Your quick thoughts on taking Maduro out? Maybe that's the wrong way to phrase it. Sounds like they killed him. They arrested him. You've got the left freaking out in Canada and the United States, but I have to point out, Mark Carney just yesterday said it's welcome news. The left is still freaking out, but Mark Carney said it's welcome news. Your thoughts?
Yeah, Brian, I agree. Early January is big. It's almost like the big power players in the world are sort of saving up. They're recharging over the Christmas holidays and they're ready to hit that button. And Donald Trump, absolutely. Look, I'm on my third coffee of this morning. I see you got one going. It's the first week of January, and my head, in a way, it hurts, but I'm trying to step back and say, look, Brian, we've talked before. I tell you, my theory is that everything going on with Trump trolling the world, scaring Canada, this all fits into what I've been saying, that we're very close to war spreading in Europe with Russia, China, and Taiwan. The world is getting more dangerous. Trump has said he's going to secure the Western Hemisphere. If you remember, when Trump was elected, I believe in his first speech to the House, he said, we're going to secure Panama. We will not have foreign powers, basically, running the game in our backyard. So that, to me, is what's happening with Maduro. Look,
Let me pause there, though, because that was the start of it. And whether we're talking Panama, Greenland, Venezuela, the part that people keep missing does involve China. Because why did Trump want to secure the Panama Canal? He said he wanted to have it back in U.S. control. He doesn't have that, but the Chinese are exiting. China was setting up port infrastructure at both ends. They were trying to take effective control of the Panama Canal. China and Russia do have ships. I know lots of people keep saying, oh, no, they're not there. They're not in Greenland. They're not in the Canadian Arctic. Yes, they are. Even Mark Carney has acknowledged that. And China was in Venezuela. China's trying to pop up all over the place in the Western Hemisphere, in North and South America. They're trying to play in our backyard to have global dominance.
absolutely. This is the big picture I've been writing about for years. I think people thought that I was crazy. Some of them
You're
have.
crazy.
Well, look, you have to be a
I
little
said
bit
that in the
crazy.
best way.
If the US is talking about taking Greenland, you have to be a little bit crazy to understand what's going on in the world. Brian, you know that I've been talking about, Canada's role in fentanyl is worse than people will acknowledge in Ottawa. I look back to, I interviewed a senior US official about Canada's role in fentanyl. This was last year. People can go to the Bureau and read it. And this person, who I can't name, very
Last year,
aware.
before Trump was talking about it.
April 2025, before there's really talk of Maduro, this person was saying fentanyl, China, Russia, money laundering across the Western Hemisphere. We've talked about Margarita Island, Ryan Wedding. This comes up in the indictment against Maduro. And my US source said, look, the world is getting more dangerous. There's something like 10 to 15 supercharged Chinese ports of access in the Western Hemisphere, one of them being the west coast of Mexico, where most of the fentanyl from China is going in, to a port controlled by the very Hong Kong business person who is in that Panama Canal. That fentanyl is going up to Vancouver, as I've written, and my source says, look, you would not have J.D. Vance going up to Greenland. You don't have Marco Rubio talking about taking back Panama unless the world is getting very dangerous, more dangerous than 99% of citizens can understand. So back to Maduro. Look, we've talked about how a lot of things can be true at once. I Brian, I have DEA sources. These are the most non-political, most fact-based people you can imagine. They're very military oriented. They've been telling me for years that Venezuela is a narco state. Maduro is part of the Western Hemisphere drug trafficking enterprise. He uses military people. This is all reflected in the indictment that was just unsealed, after special forces extracted Maduro. And beyond that, as we've talked about, Venezuela is a proxy state used by China, used by Russia, used by Iran, all the themes we've talked about. So, one, Maduro's a bad guy. He was harming North Americans. He was letting China and Russia use his territory. This was an increasing military threat, not just a drug threat. And this is also about oil, or rather, the US government getting control of that oil rather than Venezuela sending the oil to Russia and
All right.
China
So
and Iran, right? So it's all part of a big picture, I believe.
let me go back to the
Yeah,
narco trafficking.
yeah.
In January of last year, Anthony Blinken, who was the Secretary of State for Joe Biden, not to be confused with anybody associated with MAGA. Actually, let me just pull up and give you the exact date. Uh, Headline on the news release: condemning Nicolas Maduro's illegitimate attempt to seize power in Venezuela and announcing new actions against Maduro and his representative to support the Venezuelan people. Press statement: Anthony J. Blinken, Secretary of State, January 10th, 2025. This is in my latest Substack. They announced an increase in the reward for Maduro's arrest to $25 million. They also increased the reward for the arrest of his Interior Minister, uh, Diosdado Cabello,
Bello, yeah,
to $25 million, dollars, and then a new reward of up to $15 million dollars for his defense minister, Vladimir Lopez.
yeah.
This is from Anthony Blinken, and it says right in the news release these three reward offers stem from criminal narco trafficking indictments announced in March 2020. This is the Trump administration and the Biden administration felt the same way about Maduro. You've got folks in Canadian media like Andrew Coyne who were apoplectic, saying the international community has to act to take Maduro out, to remove him from power. And then, well, one guy does, and oh my God, he's going to take over the whole world. Now, look, the is this just about oil? No, I think oil's a part of it, and
Hmm.
I'll get your take on this. Oil's a part of it. The drug trafficking is a part of it. Not only sending cocaine up into the United States, which they say is, killed a lot of people. By the way, stimulants not as deadly as fentanyl, but still quite deadly, cocaine being one of them. Not only sending cocaine up into the United States, but also shipping it to Lebanon, where it's processed by Hezbollah and then distributed throughout Europe by Hezbollah, thus funding terrorism at the behest of Iran. Jason Kenney, our former immigration minister, has talked about being briefed on this
Yeah,
more than a decade ago, and he said, well, wait a minute. These guys are supposed to be ultra religious. And the security officials in Canada showed him the fatwas that had been issued saying, as long as you're selling it to non believers, it's okay. And so this is how cocaine from Venezuela, with the backing of Iran, funding Hezbollah, and then, destroying lives in Europe. You've got China with their Belt and Road Initiative in Venezuela, investing in ports and taking payment in oil. You've got Russia signing trade and, more disturbingly, defense agreements with Venezuela over the past several months. And then you've got Iran moving their drone technology, where they're building drones in Venezuela that can hit any part of Florida. Tell me what American president would not have done this operation.
that's what I was thinking just the other day as I was shaking my head and trying to get a handle on all this, the fog of war, the disinformation. To me, I could see President Barack Obama doing this move. First of all, I could see him doing it. It's quite strategically brilliant. It's America first. It's almost to me, it reminds me of an updated version of the Cuban Missile Crisis. It's just the vectors in play are different now. They're not missiles, they're not nuclear, which is a lot more dangerous, but the intent of the Chinese Communist Party and the Russians to use Latin America against North America is the same. The threat is the same. And as Leo Hozakos, the leader in for the conservatives in the Senate, he responded to my reporting on the indictment and said, "Look, it's well known that China, Russia, Turkey, Putin, Xi, they're using Latin America to attack North America in very complex ways." So, had Barack Obama done this operation, I believe the New York Times would be cheering it. I think serious people in the world see that this move, uh, as you say, yeah, it's about oil. It's also about the security of North America and preventing China, I believe, from attacking Taiwan. Because let's not lose sight of the fact that China and their security forces, Cuban security forces, were very much on the ground in Venezuela. China in in the way of it providing stealth, you know, defensive technology supposedly to block flight, stealth choppers. It failed. So China got the message there. And the cherry on top, Brian, was there was a high level Chinese delegation on the ground meeting Maduro hours before special forces extracted him. And I really don't think that's coincidental. I
They were
think
supposed to have a second round of meetings on Saturday. I'm sorry, we've misplaced the president.
he won't be making that second meeting. So look, when we step back, look, I think the CIA was very involved in Venezuela and very successful. They're proving that they're on their forward foot. They've had some big successes in Ukraine as well. We can read about in the New York Times. I think they're probably a little bit active in Iran right now. So there's many moving pieces going on. And when you take out the politics of the reaction to the Maduro extraction, he's a bad narco that was killing North Americans. I believe that's true and will be proven in court. And we're safer. We're safer for it.
And he was killing his own people and oppressing them. I was reading an account by a former Cargill executive, of course, one of the major food processors
Yeah,
throughout the Western world, and they described how under Chavez and Maduro, things just got increasingly worse to the point where some of their operations were taken over by generals. And of course, there's, according to some reports, as many as 2,000 generals, and the way they keep them in line and not revolting against them is that they're given the ability to take over these businesses and then they get to profit from them. Except some of them don't know how to operate. And so Cargo's producing all this food in Venezuela still. And then the generals come in and take it over. And then suddenly they can't operate it and it falls apart. Or they just start stealing things from them, seizing it, forcing them to sell it below production costs because, well, the government production isn't working anymore. This is a government that had to go, and the whole world said it. Donald Trump finally did it. You know, I'm not sure Barack Obama, maybe Obama would have done this. Joe Biden clearly didn't. Bill Clinton would have done it for sure.
for
Bill
sure.
Clinton absolutely would have done this. This is not a partisan thing. This is not a MAGA thing. This is, given everything that you and I have described with the drugs, the foreign interference, the your enemies in the backyard, military, all of that. No American president would have accepted this. So yeah, Maduro had to go. Now, what comes next? I don't know. And that's going to be the big question. I hope it's not a decade and a half of nation building in Venezuela. I think left to their own devices, with some assistance, the Venezuelan people will be able to recuperate. This is not trying to impose democracy in the Badlands of Afghanistan. This is a country that not that long ago was as prosperous as Canada, but due to bad policy, ended up with horrid conditions, out of control inflation. So they can come back. Um, Interesting writing in the New York Times, though, on why Trump and his people are not going with Machado at this point. I don't know if you saw this piece, just came out yesterday. Did you?
I did see it, yeah, and it's pretty compelling. It has the ring of truth to it, I think.
So, three different senior reporter bylines on it. So, for people that want to say, well, it's the New York Times, I'm not going to listen. eh, Look, this is them saying things that are not negative about the Trump administration, talking to intelligence officials, political officials, and people on the ground in Venezuela. Is that the CIA said, you can't put Machado in charge right now. She doesn't have the support of any of the levers of power, including the military, the intelligence agencies. You put her in now, they're just going to get rid of her. And so,
She may end up dead if you put her in power now. That's a possibility.
yeah, which would be a bad thing. My read of her is that on paper she sounds good. Whether she would be a good leader or not, I don't know. I've talked to Venezuelans who are very excited at the prospect of her being in there. But not only did the CIA report say that the levers of power, she doesn't have access to any of them. She doesn't have a team around her that can go in and take control. They also described how going back to last January, she wasn't working well with Richard Grenfell, the special advisor that Trump had sent in there to deal with Venezuela. She didn't show up to meetings. He said, "Meet me in person." She refused. Would only do a phone call. He said, "Give me a list of political prisoners." She refused. Didn't want to, show favoritism. Like the U.S. government is asking you for tools to help them help you, and you're not being helpful. That's not going to win you friends and influence people.
Yeah, and it just makes sense. We all should be understanding we're living in a very realpolitik world where Washington has recognized that the opposition isn't playing by the so-called rules-based order. Hard power is the rule of the day. So if Mikado isn't understanding that she will need U.S. support, maybe she wants to play it completely pure and go into power saying, "I never talked to the CIA." That's not going to work because remember, this guy Cabello, who we're talking about in the indictment, he's involved, in sending cocaine shipments around the world from the president's hangar. He's involved in Margarita Island, where we're talking about all the worst people in the world, including Ryan Wedding, dealing drugs. And he's now the de facto power. They have what's called in the indictment collectivos who were working for Maduro and his wife Celia Flores, who is in control of the justice system in Venezuela. These are
And
people on
collectivos are like paramilitary.
paramilitary guys on motorcycles with lawn guns, machine guns, racing around Caracas, threatening people, reportedly searching their phones to see if they have any anti Maduro, pro Trump messages. So these are the people in power through this Cabello guy who is subject of a massive multi-million dollar sort of wanted list from the states. And yet the states, again, realpolitik, at this point, they want to see elections, but they want to see stability. And so there, I agree. The New York Times story did seem very solid that Marco Rubio, the State Department, the CIA are trying to, figure out a way to get some stability in there. And that means working with Maduro's underlings, the generals, at this point, in a certain sense.
But I mean, they seem pretty clear in my read that they don't want them to stay in power forever. This is just of what's there now, and they're putting the economic squeeze on them.
They're putting the economic squeeze, and the perfect proof of this, Brian, you said, what's coming next? I just wrote a story along with the New York Times this morning. U.S. European Command, Special Forces Coast Guard took control of a Russian tanker that had been switching its flags. People can go on X and see a post from the U.S. military, 8:45 a.m. this
Yeah.
morning.
So tell us about this. Like, so yeah, I've been out and about this morning, and then you tell me as we're about to record, they seized a Russian ship. With a Russian ghost ship. What's a ghost ship?
A ghost ship is one of these ships used by Russia, China, Iran. They're circling the world. They evade sanctions. So if the U.S. government or Europe puts sanctions on a country for, uh, crimes against humanity or other things for proliferation, these ships are used by our enemies, China, Russia, Iran, to move oil clandestinely around the world from countries or their proxy states, such as Venezuela. So this morning, this has been a developing story over the past 2 weeks. The US military has sort of put this blockade around Venezuela. They don't want oil going to Cuba. They don't want oil going to Iran. They're about to move in on Maduro, and they've been trailing this Russian ship, which has switched its flag or its call signals over the past 2 weeks. And so this is like a movie in development. The U.S. forces are tracing this ship from Venezuela as it goes up the Atlantic into the North Atlantic between Greenland and the United Kingdom, and the U.S. forces mount it this morning. They say that Russian submarines are trailing it at the same time. So this is like a Cold War era in our new times standoff, with the US saying, no, you're not going to steal oil over a state that we have essentially asserted our influence over, right? And so it just points to everything I'm talking about. I want to bat it back to you and just take a big step back. Talk to Steve Bannon about what's going on in the Arctic and Greenland. Well, the US mounting a Russian, undercover ship off the coast between Greenland and Northern Europe looks like part of that big picture that I've been thinking about.
I'll get back to Bannon in a moment, but Finland just seized a Russian ship the other day, claiming that it again was a ghost ship, uh, under suspicion of sabotaging undersea telecom cables going from Estonia to Helsinki. And so what the ship did was got into the waters where these vital communications pieces of infrastructure are, dropped anchor and dragged the anchor. So they dropped anchor but kept sailing to destroy the infrastructure. Uh, don't tell me that we're not in a Cold War or even a semi lukewarm war with Russia. They are not playing uh, by the Queensberry rules here. They're not.
No, their forces have been sabotaging across Europe over the past year at scales I don't pretty unprecedented. Drones flying over, you know, Denmark airspace, etc. And yeah, China and Russia have these ghost ships that are doing that same play, dragging cables off of Taiwan or the Northern Atlantic off Finland. It's been happening for a couple years now. So again, that's part of that big picture that I think probably Steve Bannon was pointing towards with you. And I mean, that brings us to the other, is Trump really going to invade Greenland? Is he doing his thing of trolling the world, and he'll actually, you know dial it back and score a deal to have some sort of purchase agreement or increased military functions there? Like, all this is in play, and I think Bannon was pointing to you towards that.
Yeah. So after I saw the headline last night that Marco Rubio told a congressional briefing that Donald Trump wants to buy Greenland, that he had asked for an updated package just on Monday, that I went back and I rewatched the Bannon interview that I did about 11 months ago, mid February, and where I was asking him, okay, how serious is Donald Trump about the 51st state, about Greenland? And, even after watching it again, Bannon had said, "Oh, he's very serious about Canada. He's very serious about the 51st state." Even he didn't say that Trump wanted to invade or, hostile takeover, but he does want a partnership. And so my view with Greenland has always been that one way or another, they just want to have American control of the waterways around that so that they can keep the Russians and the Chinese out, or to have military installations. You, uh, I'll post this map that is floating around online. If you look at a Mercator map, that's the standard map where everything runs uh, east to west sort of thing, and North America's on top, and Russia's way over here. If you look from the polar view, there's a
Mhm.
map showing exactly why they want the ability to use Greenland for military defenses, and that is where the Russian major defense buildup their offensive part of the Russian military is based, it's straight across. You want to hit
Mhm,
Canada and the continental United States, you put it across, and guess what it goes across? Greenland.
mhm.
And so my view is that Trump doesn't want a hostile takeover. He doesn't want to fight. Like this whole narrative that, well, he won't take military action off the table. You're talking to Stephen Miller. Stephen Miller is, a bomb thrower, a spear thrower. He goes out there to cause shit.
Mhm.
And he's good at it. He's good at what he does, and he gets people talking. And so Jake Tapper pushed him on CNN. Will you rule out military force? He said, no one's going to fight the United States of America over Greenland. That's accurate. If the United States decided to take it militarily, they could. It's what, 56,000 people? They've got more people on some military bases than the entire population of Greenland. So they could take it if they wanted. But my view was always they just want to have some control for defense purposes, and they'll work with Denmark or they'll buy it. I never saw it as a hostile thing, despite the bluster. Was I being naive, or were other people being over the top with this, as we called it earlier, fear factory stuff?
I mean, this is why I have to keep drinking coffee all day in the start of
I'm gonna
January
have another
because
one soon.
look, there's so much going on. When I ask myself these questions, it's all fitting into the big picture. I try to simplify things narrative that China and Russia are not going to back off. If they see any weakness from Washington, China is ready to move on Taiwan. That risk was scaled back with the action against Maduro. Does Trump want to take Greenland militarily? That's never going to happen. But as you say, for the Stephen Millers of the administrations going out there, let's say to the advance and throwing the bombs, throwing the smoke, getting people all riled up, and as one of my US friends says, up in a tree, seeing which way they'll move. Trump is moving in behind that. Marco Rubio, who I think people are accurately assessing is probably the second most powerful person in America and the world right now, because he's got his hands on a lot of
Yeah.
different levers.
Well, he's running the Hilton now. I don't know if you heard. He's
I
running
saw that.
everything. He's
Every
the new
problem he's
manager of Manchester United as well.
look, Marco
The
Rubio
memes are
told
great.
told lawmakers that you talked about this briefing story, which I read too, that the US wants to buy. Yeah, the US will, at the end of the day, if you ask me to predict, they'll get increased military usage. They'll throw some goodies to the local population. Denmark, at the end of the day, will have better trade with the United States. I saw a post from a security analyst that I trust a few days ago pointing to, I believe, increased sort of defense cooperation under the table between Denmark and the United States. So I'm trying to filter out the noise, and the signal is the U.S. will get increased control in Greenland, and it won't involve, sending in forces. A lot of European leaders will be mad. A lot of people on the Canadian left will be screaming. I don't think you and I will even be happy with the way that the Washington's throwing elbows, but us in Canada will be more safe. And that brings me to another thought. Again, it's an era of hard power. Canada doesn't really matter anymore until we get our military up and running, until we get our security services taking care of the Chinese, Iranian threats on our soil, which, comes full circle to a lot of things we're talking about today.
We've got a lot of Venezuelan expats here. Um, do we have members of the regime the way we've got members of the Iranian regime, the IRGC, or high-ranking members of transnational Chinese criminal gangs or United Front Works Department folks? Do we have the same thing going on with Venezuelan expats, or are they? I'm assuming that the majority in all cases are people who fled, but do we have the same problem where the local diaspora community in Canada is turning around going, "Hey, why'd you let the terrorist in? Why'd you let the guy that we ran away from into the country?"
I think our major problems, the ones I know of where we're an outlier in the world, are with the Iranian regime and Iranian Middle Eastern crime, the Chinese regime and Chinese crime, and how I've talked about how they have become essentially the bosses of people like Ryan Wedding in Canada, I have less concern or understanding that Venezuelan or Cuban sort of intelligence is very dangerous in Canada. But look, I can tell you, I've been told absolutely Cuban actors, Turkish, Middle Eastern, Pakistan, all of those figures from regime and figures with connections to organized crime are actors in Canada. And as I've written recently, Brian, you can see that crossover in the ecosystem of what we of media companies, the people that have been involved in these pro-Hamas protests that we were going to talk about, the Turtle Island wild-eyed leftists. I think those people, uh, internationally and through the internet, are being very, I would say, influenced by Cuba. Cuba especially is a bigger player, I think, than people recognize. So
But
Cuba
the
would be
Cubans, it was an entire Cuban security detachment around Maduro. He couldn't even rely on Venezuelans for his security detachment in the end.
I just had an op-ed from a Cuba democracy expert the other day, pointing to the 32 hardened Cuban intelligence killed around Maduro. That's if not the majority, close to half of the people killed in that U.S. Special Forces operation. And this person, Michael Lima, a researcher and expert, says Cuba has implanted its intelligence advisors across Latin America. And again, of course, they're working directly with China, Russia. So, look, I do think through disinformation that Cuba is a big player in Canada and the United States, by the way. New York City, just an incredible amount of these, if we want to call them sort of Hamastics that have been, marching around North American universities. These leftist groups are very active in North America. And I think that's part of that sort of fear factory disinformation war you asked me about. How are we supposed to respond to Maduro, which most of Venezuelans, most of Latin America is in favor of that guy being gone.
Yeah, I'm sure you saw the memes over the weekend. Someone setting up a booth. I mean, it's AI generated. People understand. Of the guy standing there, it says trading your Palestinian flags for your Venezuelan flags here. Within hours of this operation taking place, it's noon or 1 o'clock Toronto time. That around there, the people were showing up with professionally printed banners and signs saying "Hands off Venezuela." Where did this come from? It's the same network. A lot of it funded out of China, the People's Forum, etc. Warren Kinsella had a great piece in the Toronto Sun about this. Um, just it is the same anti-West groups, and again goes to the fact of the average citizen doesn't know what's going on behind the scenes,
The
and
average
most media outlets aren't going to report on that.
I agree. And those very same, placard or poster producers were the ones that produce highly graphic, disgusting, and yet highly produced images of Charlie Kirk with blood gushing out his neck that was posted on these university campus billboards the day after that assassination. So yeah, I would like our listeners, yours and the bureaus, to know more that these hardened, I would call them Marxist cells, information sort of collectives, are across North America. They're very deeply embedded on campuses, in media companies, some of them mainstream. And yeah, absolutely, I and others have reported on how a Chinese Communist Party supported Marxist billionaire named Neville Roy Singham uh, is involved in funding, some of the
Isn't
key
isn't he
key entities.
American originally?
Yeah, he's an American tech billionaire. This is quite the rabbit hole that he makes a billion off of. Who knows what was behind it when you really think about it. Moves over to Shanghai. He's married nominally to this woman that leads an entity called Code Pink, one of these, you know, veteran
Anti-war, anti-West.
anti-war, anti-West, anti-imperialism, And so it's a partnership of this guy living in Shanghai, the New York Times again. They do some very interesting good work. They're not just political. They're not, and they did an expose of this guy's funding around the world and his connections to China's United Front and Code Pink. So absolutely, it's like, uh,
Yeah. New York Post has done some good stuff on him as well.
yeah, pick
Um,
a leftist cause for, and within days after an international event occurs, you're going to see people in the streets, and they're all coming from these same entities.
there's a guy on, Fox News, one of their digital guys, very in-depth piece on how he was up. He happened to be up when the first alerts came out about the Maduro operation, and he immediately went online, and then he documented within how many minutes it took for these accounts that all tie back to the groups we're talking about to start crafting the narrative that Maduro was kidnapped, that this was illegal, that this is about oil. And it by the time the sun was up, the narrative was set, and then a bunch of politicians, mainly New Democrats here, in Canada and Democrats in the States picked up and ran with that narrative in the morning. It was not crafted by the parties. It was crafted by these far left groups. I'm not even sure that some of the politicians know that. I know that some of the ones in Canada that parroted it wouldn't care. I was asking you earlier if Venezuela's drug gangs are here. So I was Googling. MS-13, they're not Venezuelan, but they're South American active. Uh, Originated out of California with Salvadoran groups. They are active in Canada. There's been arrests in Toronto, but Tren de Aragua
Hmm.
uh, is, according to Canadian officials, active in Canada and last year was listed as a banned terrorist organization. So, may not be Maduro, but it is that. Now, you and I have talked before about the money laundering side. If I can keep you
Hmm.
for a few more minutes here. We've
Sure.
talked about the money laundering side related to fentanyl, related to Chinese, Mexican cartels and Chinese gangs. Uh, was any of the money laundering for what was coming out of Venezuela happening here that you know of? Does it all just get mixed in together at some point? You had this great piece, and it's not related to Venezuela, about the TD Bank employee who was smurfing all kinds of money through a TD Bank in New York.
Yeah.
You had that the other day, pled guilty. Is the money laundering for Venezuela happening here?
Absolutely. Let me try to thread the needle on both of those. So, after I did my story on the Maduro indictment, of course, in my mind was my writing and our previous conversation about how Ryan Wedding, the Canadian Olympic Mexican narco, uh, a big case pointed to how he was moving massive amounts of cocaine through Margarita Island and up the coast to Halifax. And so, as I told you before in our talk, that just showed how Canadian organized crime working together with the worst elements in Venezuela and the Sinaloa cartel to use Canada as a transshipment point and a reception point for massive amounts of Colombian cocaine. So the indictment points to Margarita Island being used, and this guy Cabello, who's now the de facto, we believe, head in Venezuela, accused, along with Maduro, of using Margarita Island. Uh, this guy Cabello and other senior Venezuelan figures, along with the Tren de Aragua gang boss, who's co-accused in the indictment, are said to have been working with uh, a Middle Eastern named massive narco in Venezuela. My story this week pointed to there appear to be Hezbollah connections to these people named in the indictment and Margarita Island. And so, as you say, Jason Kenney did that incredible post on X saying, again, hey, look at what's happening in Venezuela. He was briefed in 2008 that Hezbollah, Iran, were working with the Venezuelan narcos to bring cocaine from these radical leftist narco terror groups in Colombia up to Margarita Island, Venezuela, over to the Middle East. Hezbollah is with their fatwas selling it to the kafir or the non-believers to support their struggle, right? To I would say, attack the West. But Mr. Kenny said he was briefed by a foreign intelligence agency. Was that DA, CIA? I don't know. He was briefed that
I
Canada
thought it
is
was Canadian.
no, if you go back to his post, he
Okay, I'll
points
have to
to
go
a
back and look.
yeah, he points to a foreign intelligence agency. In quotes, he said, they showed me receipts. He said the foreign intelligence agency told Mr. Kenny Canada is weak in immigration. They're letting Iranians of concern, Middle Easterns of concern, come in and use Canada. Canada is lax on money laundering. And here's the thing where it brings into my expertise. Hezbollah, working with the Latin cartels, is laundering drug money. They're buying or stealing used cars and shipping them out of the port of Montreal over to West Africa, again, to fund weapons procurement, Hezbollah, Iran. So Mr. Kenny, a senior Canadian politician, is saying, yeah, the worst of the world, including Iran, are using Venezuela. And, the money laundering, I had already written, Brian, years ago when I was with Global News that my senior American government sources had warned the RCMP back in the 2008 that Canada needs to crack down on Hezbollah using Canadian cities to launder this money coming up from Latin America. And Canada had no response. Again, the RCMP stonewalled some people I know in the DEA. That brings us back to who's involved in going after Maduro and the indictment, the DEA. We could talk about the TD Bank case. At the end of the day, China, is that, as my U.S. senior sources say, every dollar laundered in the Western Hemisphere. At the end of the day, Chinese organized crime, money brokers, underground bankers with connections to the Chinese Communist Party are facilitating and directing and taking a cut. And that points to the TD Bank case where, the record shows, and my US sources say, Canada was nowhere to be seen in regulating massive money laundering through our banks. It had to be the US DEA in the New York, New Jersey sort of banks to crack down on that. And my story last night pointed to a TD Bank employee in Manhattan facilitating a network that laundered close to 500 million US dollars through New York TD Bank branches.
Yeah, just shy of 500,000. And I said he was smurfing it, and of course, smurfing it would be small amounts under 10,000. But I believe your story actually said he was putting through deposits well above that that should have triggered warnings,
So
and
here,
it didn't
yeah,
happen.
let me unpack that real quick because I know you and I need more coffee and more reporting today. But look, Brian, I was an expert on the TD Bank case because it was the exact same thing I exposed in British Columbia casinos. Chinese organized crime bringing literally duffel bags of cash. We're not talking $10,000. We're talking $300,000, $200,000. Much of it brought by Chinese international students to the windows of TD Bank branches in the tri-state, so New York, New Jersey. They're delivering it to people they have bribed at the window. They're literally, you can go to the bureau. There's a picture of a guy with literally stacks of cash. So they get that cash deposited. They get the corrupt TD Bank employees to give them checks, and then they're moving those checks around the world. This is Chinese underground money laundering at the highest levels. And the concern here is any bank can be taken advantage of, but you have these reporting requirements going up the chain, and TD Bank in Canada was not responding to these blaring alerts of suspicious transactions, which is why they've paid over $3 billion in fines and penalties in in admitting complicity in money laundering. That's the story. And again, I say, I exposed it first in Vancouver casinos, just egregious money laundering.
You can read Sam Cooper at thebureau.news. You can read me at On Your Side, brianlilly.com, or the Toronto Sun. Sam, we could talk for hours, but as you say, we need more coffee and we
More
need to do
coffee.
more reporting. Talk soon.
Talk soon. Bye.